The Moon Jae-in administration marked 2 years in office in May 2019. The administration's economic agenda is referred to as J-nomics, a combination of the president's name and economics. So, how has it changed the Korean economy over the past 2 years? The Chamber delves deeper into that question this week. I'm your host, Panita Bajaj. Joining us this week are panelist Todd Sample and special guest Professor Park Sang-in from Seoul National University.
So for those of you curious about Korea and what goes on around the world, we are here in Seoul, the economic hub of Northeast Asia. So without further ado, let's step into the chamber.
다음은 대통령께서 대한민국 헌법에 따라 취임 선서를 하시겠습니다.
저는 오늘 대한민국 제19대 대통령으로서 새로운 대한민국을 향해 첫걸음을 내딛습니다. 치열했던 경쟁의 순간을 지루하고
President Moon Jae-in marked the second anniversary of his inauguration on May 10th. The Moon administration's economic agenda, often referred to as J-nomics, relies on the principles of income-led growth, innovation-led growth, and a fair economy. At the center of J-nomics is income-led growth. In other words, the government was implementing policies aimed at reducing income disparities and living expenses. The minimum wage hike in particular was described as the bedrock of income-led growth by guaranteeing the quality of life of low-wage workers, thereby fostering equity along with growth.
특히 최저임금 인상은 우리 경제의 체질을 바꾸는 의미 있는 결정입니다. 저임금 노동자의 삶의 질을 보장하고 가계소득을 높여 소득주도 성장의 기반이 될 것입니다.
Another pillar of J-nomics is innovation-led growth. In pursuit of this strategy, the government since last year has been trying to tear down barriers and open up to innovation.
신제품과 신기술은 시장 출시를 우선 허용하고 필요시 사후에 규제하는 방식으로 규제 체계를 전면적으로 전환해 보자는 것입니다.
The good news is that regulatory innovation laid the foundation for an environment of innovation-led growth. The last pillar of J-nomics is a fair economy.
국민의 삶이 고르게 나아지고 불평등을 넘어 함께 잘 사는 사회로 가는 첫 해로 만들어 보겠습니다. 그 모든 중심에 공정과 일자리가 있다는 사실을 다시 한번 다짐합니다.
By establishing a fair economy, the administration hoped to build a society free of foul play and unfair privileges, and a nation in which all people prosper together.
지금까지 이제 우리 경제가 강자의 경제였다면 이제는 공정한 경제로 양극화가 극심한 그런 이제 사회에서 이제는 또 함께 잘 사는 그런 식의 경제로 확실히 임기가 마실 때쯤이면 이제 그런 시대가 우리에게 이미 왔다라는 것을 국민들이 좀 피부로 느끼실 수 있도록 최선을 다하겠습니다.
So, what kind of impact has J-nomics had on the Korean economy? To commemorate the second anniversary of the Moon Jae-in administration, we zoom in on the successes and limitations of J-nomics and project the administration's economic policy for its third year in office.
Well, Thank you very much for joining us once again, Todd, and welcome Professor Park Sang-in to the chamber. We've got lots to talk about today, and definitely time has flown by. We're half past 2019 and also half past President Moon Jae-in's term. 2 years of his administration has gone by, so let's talk about his accomplishments, but also challenges ahead. Now, I think from the way beginning, he's always focused on the youth when it comes to more jobs for them, raising the minimum wage and things like that, which we'll talk about later on, but more visible growth when it comes to income-led growth and things of that nature, especially early this year as well. So to evaluate where his administration stands after 2 years in office, can you give us some figures when it comes to economic growth rate, when it comes to employment rate and income distribution?
Okay, economic growth rate for last 2 years has been good, basically, as in more than the average of OECD countries. Actually, in 2017, when the Moon administration came into the power, it was 3.1%. It's remarkably high. And the last year, it was 2.7%, still very good number. But the thing is, the first quarter of this year, the growth rate was minus 0.3 compared to the last quarter. However, the employment rate has not been around 60%, which is lower than average of the OECD countries. The most problematic issue is the income distribution issue. So the ratio of top 20% over bottom 20% household income went up. That means deteriorating of the income distribution. So especially in 2018, bottom 20% household income went down in absolute sense as well. So it is not good news for Moon administration.
So the drop in GDP that you mentioned, do you think this is just a blip on the screen, or do you think that this is maybe a sign of something else?
I guess, first of all, the last year it has been very good because of the so-called super cycle of semiconductor, right? So, but on the other end, right, the super cycle semiconductor is gone by end of the last year. So that also implies that the quarters to come will have also difficult time as well. So in a sense, that is the so-called the baseline effect as well, but also it has some prediction for the quarters to come.
Mm-hmm. Right, so I think we've talked about also the GDP. We've entered this 30-50 club, $30,000 US for 50 million people. So in retrospect, we see that and we're thinking, oh, wow, this is a great accomplishment. We've reached a milestone. But then one of the disadvantages of that is seeing that it's not really trickling down to the people. It doesn't mean that a family of four is earning $120,000.
Right, so according to a recent survey, President Moon's popularity rating is hovering around 50%. However, from an economic perspective, that has nosedived. So from your perspective, what is your assessment of his economic policies from that?
Moon administration had to do some fair economy policy first, including some structural changes of Korean economy. As I mentioned, the manufacturing sector in Korea is really huge. It occupies about 30% of GDP. It is really huge. China has less than 30%, and Japan 19%, and Germany 22%. Manufacturing sector in Korea is really important, huge sector, and it has been the driven force of the economic growth of Korea up until 2010. Right, but since the 2011, the manufacturing sector showed a lot of signs of the problems and the crisis. So the Moon Jae-in administration have to have some more fundamental remedy for this structural issue. And after this structural remedy, probably they have to push, innovation-driven and income-led growth policy, then end up with a spectacular synergy effect on Korean economy. However, in the beginning, the Moon administration put the priority on the income-led growth policy, and the push from the income-led growth policy was not well observed Korean economy, given the structure of the Korean economy. But still, Moon administration has 3 more years to go. I guess they have time to readjust, and then we have, I guess, they can make it better, in my opinion.
So these changes that you mentioned, in particular the restructuring, do you think this is a timing issue that other presidents would have encountered anyway, or do you think that specifically these are challenges that, as you said, are kind of related to his priorities, or perhaps a misunderstanding of which priority should come first?
Well, the thing is, I mean, the structural issue has been there, not only for the Moon administration. I guess, I mean, as I mentioned, it has become evident since 2011. So that is the era of the ex-president Lee Myung-bak. So the Lee Myung-bak administration and the Park Geun-hye administration haven't done anything at all, actually. So then the situation became worse and worse. And I guess Moon administration inherited that kind of situation. But I guess, they didn't take any specific action so far. That is disappointing to me. And in the sense, I mean, it has been no fundamental change in economic policy between Moon administration and the 2 previous administration of Conservative Party.
Right, well, what exactly is this income-led growth that we're seeking out? I mean, this J-nomics was something that he created a term, or his administration created this term from his first year, but what exactly is that?
Yeah, actually, income-led growth policy is kind of a new terminology used only in Korea. Actually, it has a kind of Korean version of wage-led growth policy, which has been advocated by ILO, International Labor Organization. The idea is the following. The labor portion of national income is not high in many countries. So if the labor portion of income, national income goes up, then the working classes has more higher propensity for consumption. So they will consume more, and it will stimulate the aggregate demand, and which will also cause business to invest more. So end up with some kind of synergy effect and good circle of the economic activities. That is the whole idea of the wage-led growth theory. But in Korea, we have a huge portion of the self-employed in the service sector. So the reason why using the terminology of income-led instead of wage-led in Korea, because of the inclusion of the self-employed in service sector.
So this income-led growth, of course, it was implemented in order to promote cooperation and decrease polarization. However, there's a lot of criticism that this policy doesn't really match the reality of the Korean economy as we see it today. So others, on the other hand, argue that perhaps it's a little bit too early to put a judgment down on this policy. So what are your thoughts on that?
I guess, I mean, I totally agree on the argument that it is too early to judge the full impact of the income-led policy. However, what I meant is not on positive side only. It could be negative side as well, but it's too early to, measure which one is bigger due to the policy impact, right? The last year in 2018, there is a lot of controversial discussions among the economists on the conservative and the liberal sides, and regarding the impact of the income-led policy, especially its impact on the employment and the inequality of the income, etc. The minimum wage hike has been huge, actually. It has been almost 30% in 2 years. It's a really huge hike. And but the thing is, I mean, the impact of the hike in the minimum wage may, be realized in this year, probably next year, in my opinion. Not the 2018. It has been, 10 something point increase in 2018, and the more actually employment issue came from the crisis of the manufacturing sector. It's more local issues. So like some Ulsan or the Goje, which is the industrial city located in the southeast of Korean Peninsula, they suffer a lot of the failing small business and big business as well, and that also caused a lot of job losses in the self-employed of the service sector. So and also there has been huge change in trend of shopping. Especially young people use the internet and the mobile for their way of shopping. So these are all different kind of trend effect on the employment. So consider all these trend issues in the falling manufacturing sector and the new technology, mobile or internet shopping, etc. It's not clear whether the minimum wage hike really caused the decline in employment.
A while ago, President Moon said in his speech the job market has seen the most benefits when it comes to this minimum wage hike. What do you think that means? Is that true? Is that not?
In 2018, we had job creation in Korean economy, like almost 10,000 more jobs in the last year. However, the Moon administration promised more than 300,000 more jobs in 2018. However, end up with less than less than 100,000 more jobs. So in that sense, I mean, the promise was not delivered, and the minimum wage hike did not, actually created enough number of jobs as expected by the government or the administration. And also, the February and the March of this year posted a huge increase in new jobs, like more than 100,000 more jobs each semester on year-by-year basis, right? So then the problem there is the following. I mean, if you look into the quality of the job, many job increase caused by basically the government subsidy. So the government put a lot of the short-term job, especially for senior citizens. That counts as a lot of job increase. Also, they put more subsidy for young people for the first job seekers. So that actually boosted the increase in youth employment rate. But all these are kind of temporary policy impact, not the creation of the fundamental jobs. That is the problem.
So perhaps short term we can see a little spike in employment rates, but long term we're not seeing any.
Exactly. That is not guaranteed to have a sustainable impact. So that is the problem.
I think a lot of especially the small mom and pop businesses or SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises here, they, as you said, they were hit with a 30% raise in minimum wage, which I think could be, in that period of time, unprecedented internationally. From that perspective, a lot of these businesses are really struggling and being forced to actually lay off a lot of people. So is there a precedent for such a large increase in the minimum wage in such a short period of time?
In Korean history, this is a unique situation.
Okay.
And if you look into the foreign cases, there has been a similar situation, at least as far as I know, 2 or 3 cases. Okay, so it's not totally unique in this sense. However, it's very exceptional. The thing is, I mean, the self-employed in the business, in the service sector of Korea has huge pressure from the oversupply and also from high, the rents or etc. Right? So, given the situation, the wage hike, minimum hourly wage hike, is a really big burden to them. So far, I guess, I mean, we haven't seen huge layoff of the small business and the self-employed of the service sectors, etc. One of the reasons is the government subsidy. So the government provides a huge amount of subsidy to giving some incentive for small business to keep the jobs there. Well, I guess, I mean, I'm not sure whether they could be sustainable either. So there is another issue. So the subsidy is kind of temporal one. I mean, so once the subsidy policy ended, then if the situation or the structure of Korean economy is developing enough to accommodate that kind of hike of the minimum wage, I mean there will be a problem. In a sense, I mean we have some time to adjust the fundamental changes also to Korea, but we cannot, I mean, delay the kind of fundamental change, action, etc., to improve the quality and the structure of Korean economy.
Well, I guess we touched briefly on this job creation committee where they promised, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and we're only seeing just short-term jobs kind of popping up and then, disintegrating. We're not seeing them anymore for long-term. What do you think needs to be done to create more jobs for this administration to keep its promises?
The thing is, the Korean economy experienced a higher rate of growth compared to the OECD countries, even in 2010s, right? So the driving force of Korean manufacturing sector and Korean economy as a whole was always heavy industry, heavy and chemical industry. These are capital-intense industry, so it depends on the price competitiveness of the experienced laborer. So also, we are now experiencing dramatic technological changes, automobile industry and so-called fourth industrial revolution or the industrial 4.0 and probably digital transformation, right? So that also gave a huge challenge to Korean company at the high-end market. The manufacturing sector, especially parts and components, I mean, there is no fair competition, no opportunities because of the Jebel-dominated structure. So there has been no enough incentive for innovation because there is lots of technological extortion by the large business group over the small and medium-sized companies. So what I meant with the change of structure of economy is basically having more equal opportunity, fair competition especially for small and medium-sized company in the manufacturing sector. That is a basic idea I believe is the President Moon said in his address. I mean, the competition must be fair, yes. Right? So that is something the Moon administration have to do to create better and more jobs, especially in the parts and components, intermediate products of the manufacturing sector.
So perhaps if we switch over to an innovation-led perspective, I think this administration has somewhat carried over the previous administration's push to promote entrepreneurialism, startups, for example, based on innovation. So do you think that innovation-based growth would be one of the main drivers of this economy from the next 3 years ahead?
The Korean Jebel is a kind of one economic block itself. So there is no good opportunity for outsider as a challenger into the chain of the supply chain. That's right. So with this kind of exclusive business group structure in main industry of Korea, I guess we cannot expect any innovation at all. So that is something the government have to do, giving some structural reform of Korean economy, giving more opportunity and fair competition and the incentive. If you are successful, you can get what you deserve, right? That means you do not have to suffer from any business stealing and technology stealing.
Sure, it's more merit-based achievement.
Right, that's what the government have to do. So that's what the administration have to do from now on.
I see.
Right. Well, I guess we just have to hope for the best for the government to perhaps do their role in creating an encouraging environment where it could definitely encourage innovation with fair competition and things of that nature. Well, thank you very much, Professor Park, for joining us on the show, as well as Todd. Well, also, if you have any questions regarding Korea's economy and what goes on around the world, please feel free to drop it in our social media and send us your questions there. That's all the time we have for today's show. Hopefully, we can see you guys next week, same time, same place on The Chamber.